It began before sunrise. Streets were empty, traffic lights blinking red over deserted intersections. Then came the silence, broken only by the low hum of unmarked black vehicles. Agents in body armor stepped into the mist. No words, no warning. Just a single operation name whispered through encrypted channels. Silent Veil. Across America, from New York's narrow alleys to the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles, coordinated arrests unfolded like synchronized clockwork. 130 Iranian nationals taken within hours. Many had lived quietly for years. Some worked in logistics firms, universities, even local security companies. Others, investigators say, were connected to a darker web. Individuals with potential links to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Hezbollah. Inside ICE headquarters, the command center glowed with screens and radio feeds. Each blinking signal represented a captured suspect, each name a potential piece of an unseen puzzle stretching from Tehran to Texas. The scale was staggering. Officials revealed that the arrest came just days after President Donald Trump's order to neutralize Iran's nuclear capacity through precision airstrikes on sites near Natanz and Isfahan. Those strikes, confirmed by Reuters and Defense News, were described as the most decisive American action in the region since 2020. Intelligence suggested retaliation was imminent, not from missiles, but from sleeper agents already on U.S. soil. Former Obama-era Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson told BBC News the potential infiltration of operatives tied to Iran's military intelligence inside the United States represents a domestic threat of the highest order. As agents moved through quiet neighborhoods, the line between foreign warfare and homeland security blurred. The U.S. wasn't merely fighting terror networks overseas, it was hunting them within its own borders. Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly compared the precision of the raids to counter-terror operations once seen only in Middle Eastern war zones. Each suspect was located through months of digital tracing, financial tracking, and interagency intelligence fusion. The Pentagon described it as preventive warfare, a phrase echoing across international think tanks from Al Jazeera to The Guardian, igniting fierce debate over civil liberties and executive power. Could America maintain its moral authority while turning parts of its homeland into surveillance battlegrounds? How far could national defense extend before it began to erode the very freedoms it sought to protect? As dawn broke over Washington, those questions loomed over the Capitol like the lingering fog of the operation itself. Thick, unsettling, and unresolved. By the time morning light swept across the country, a map of invisible connections began to emerge inside federal command rooms. Phone logs, encrypted emails, and financial transfers tied several of the detainees not just to Tehran, but to front organizations suspected of channeling intelligence for Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Behind each name was a story, a quiet life masking a dangerous allegiance. One suspect, arrested outside Houston, had worked as a long-haul truck driver, yet data recovered from his devices revealed coordinates of military warehouses in California and Nevada, alongside encrypted messages sent to unknown contacts in Beirut. Another, detained near Chicago, once trained as a sniper in the Iranian army before entering the US through a student visa program. Analysts at Defense News confirmed that the operation revealed years of silent infiltration, a network built not through violence but through patience. This isn't espionage in the traditional sense, one intelligence source said. It's infiltration by adaptation, blending into society until the moment of activation. At the heart of this revelation lies a question haunting Washington's corridors. How long had these operatives been here, and how many more remain unseen? According to Reuters, the FBI and ICE traced suspicious money flows totaling over $48 million through shell companies linked to foreign entities in Turkey, Serbia, and the UAE. Some of that capital, investigators believe, helped fund logistics for Iranian proxy militias active in Syria and Iraq. While the arrests shocked many Americans, the evidence suggested something even more alarming: a strategy mirroring Iran's global approach. Similar infiltration patterns had been observed in Europe, where DW reported sleeper agents and logistical cells operating under humanitarian or educational covers. Experts from The Guardian drew parallels between this and Russia's intelligence operations in Ukraine before 2022, where civilians turned operatives had quietly gathered battlefield data months before invasion. The same logic applies. Control the information, control the terrain. In Israel, Mossad's counterintelligence units have faced identical dilemmas while dismantling Iranian-linked networks in Haifa and Tel Aviv. And across the Pacific, the United States confronts China's cyber infiltration, a digital mirror of the same phenomenon. The wars of the 21st century are not fought in deserts or skies alone. They are fought in data streams, apartment complexes, and the quiet spaces between borders. For ordinary citizens, the revelation struck deep. Neighbors awoke to find police tape across lawns, apartments sealed by federal orders, and familiar faces suddenly branded as threats. To many, it felt like the nation's hidden war had arrived on their doorstep. And beneath it all, one fear persisted. If these were the ones caught, what about those who slipped through? The question echoed through every newsroom and policy meeting. Is America now its own battlefield? Washington reacted with the urgency of a city under siege. Within hours of the raids, emergency sessions convened at the Pentagon and the National Security Council. President Donald Trump, flanked by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and National Security Advisor Kash Patel, declared that the era of silent infiltration is over. His tone was unmistakable, stern, defiant, and politically charged. Sources from Reuters confirmed that the arrest coincided with a classified series of airstrikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, targeting enrichment facilities near Isfahan and military bunkers suspected of storing precision-guided munitions. These strikes, carried out using B-2 Spirit bombers and long-range hypersonic cruise missiles, were described by Jane's Defense Weekly as the most advanced precision campaign ever executed against Iran's strategic assets. In Tehran, the reaction was explosive. Iranian state media accused Washington of state terrorism and vowed reciprocal actions wherever U.S. interests lie. Intelligence intercepts shared with BBC World Service suggested Iran's Quds Force had already activated proxy units across Iraq and Lebanon, ordering them to target U.S. convoys and regional bases. Back in America, the tone among officials hardened. The operations architect, acting ICE Director Jonathan Fahey, stated during a Fox News briefing, "This is not immigration enforcement. It's counterintelligence on home soil. The threat is already inside our borders." Analysts from DW described the political fallout as a collision between constitutional boundaries and wartime necessity. Trump's administration had long argued that national security took precedence over procedural caution, but civil liberties groups voiced concern over indefinite detentions and the opaque legal process surrounding Operation Silent Veil. Strategically, the move sent a global signal. The United States, still recovering from years of internal division, was reclaiming its role as an unflinching superpower, but it came at a cost, one that risked isolating Washington diplomatically. Al Jazeera reported growing unease among European allies, some of whom warned that preemptive domestic warfare could redefine Western democracy's moral compass. The parallel with other global flashpoints was unavoidable. In Eastern Europe, Russia's hybrid tactics in Ukraine blurred the lines between soldier and civilian. In the Middle East, Israel's ongoing shadow war with Iran demonstrated the same challenge, an enemy that hides in plain sight. And in the Pacific, Beijing's cyber warfare campaigns represented yet another form of invisible conflict, striking not with bombs, but with algorithms and influence. Yet for many Americans, this moment was about more than geopolitics. It was about the uneasy trade-off between security and freedom. Could a nation born from liberty now justify secret raids and mass detentions to preserve its safety? As dusk fell over Washington, the Capitol stood divided between those who saw the operation as necessary defense and those who feared it as a turning point toward something darker. In this new kind of war, where the enemy hides among the innocent, one question lingered in the smoke. Who protects freedom when security becomes the weapon? The storm moved from the streets to the southern border. Intelligence officials tracing the origins of several detainees made a chilling discovery. Some had crossed into the United States during the height of the migrant crisis 2 years earlier. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed that multiple suspects had entered with forged documents through smuggling routes used by Central American cartels. Routes that, according to Reuters, had long been exploited by transnational criminal networks with ties to foreign intelligence services. Trump administration insiders called it the consequence of open border negligence. At a press briefing, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described the pattern bluntly. You can't control national security if you don't control your borders. This isn't about politics, it's about survival. Data obtained by BBC News suggested that since 2021, over 2 million undocumented migrants had crossed without proper vetting. Among them, nearly 1,800 individuals were later flagged by intelligence-sharing partners in NATO as high risk due to prior military or extremist affiliations. Operation Silent Veil, analysts said, was just the beginning of cleaning up that backlog. Experts at Jane's Defense Weekly noted that this problem wasn't uniquely American. In Europe, sleeper agents had entered Germany and France disguised as asylum seekers during the 2015 to 2017 crisis. The Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, reported that many later participated in reconnaissance for hostile powers, including Iran's Quds Force and Russian GRU operatives. As parallels mounted, Trump ordered a joint interagency directive tightening entry protocols and authorizing biometric screenings at all major border crossings, an initiative that DW described as a hybrid of immigration policy and counter-terror doctrine. The move drew mixed reactions from allies. The Guardian warned that militarizing immigration might blur the humanitarian line that separates Western democracies from their adversaries. But the administration's supporters countered that moral hesitation had already endangered the country once. The tension between liberty and vigilance played out daily across news networks. Al Jazeera reported protests erupting in California, where civil rights groups accused the government of ethnic profiling. Yet in Texas and Arizona, local sheriffs praised federal cooperation, saying communities near the border had lived under the shadow of infiltration for too long. Strategically, the issue reached far beyond immigration. Analysts saw in this chaos the same weakness exploited by foreign rivals. In Ukraine, Russian agents had embedded themselves long before invasion. In Israel, Iranian proxies disguised as humanitarian workers had helped map targets before the October 2024 drone war. And in the South China Sea, US naval commanders described a new kind of espionage: civilian fishing vessels transmitting encrypted signals to Chinese submarines. The lesson was clear. Porous borders are no longer just physical, they are informational, ideological, and digital. America's internal divisions, media polarization, and humanitarian dilemmas have become as exploitable as its deserts and coastlines. In a world where warfare no longer begins with a declaration, but with a database breach or a refugee convoy, Washington faces an existential dilemma. Can a nation built on openness remain open without inviting danger? The answer, officials admit, may determine whether the United States continues to lead the world or becomes the latest democracy to fall victim to its own compassion. In the aftermath of the raids, a new front quietly opened: the courtroom. The Supreme Court's emergency ruling just weeks earlier had changed everything. For the first time in modern American history, the government could deport foreign nationals not back to their home countries, but to third-party allies willing to take them. The case, US v. Al-Khalidi, stemmed from a failed deportation to Iran's ally Syria that ended in diplomatic deadlock. The precedent now allowed removals to nations like Serbia, Kenya, or Poland, bypassing hostile regimes entirely. For Operation Silent Veil, this was the missing tool. Legal teams within the Department of Justice immediately began processing transfer orders. ICE air wings coordinated with foreign counterparts to prepare secure flights. Destinations undisclosed. Reuters confirmed that at least 4 detainees had already been flown to Eastern Europe for extended intelligence cooperation. But critics warned that such methods risked creating a gray zone of justice. The Guardian wrote that these deportations might resemble renditions in all but name, where transparency gave way to secrecy in the name of national defense. Civil liberties organizations filed urgent petitions, arguing that the process stripped detainees of due process and potentially exposed them to torture or indefinite detention abroad. In response, the Trump administration defended the policy as legal warfare, necessary to neutralize adversaries in a world where formal diplomacy no longer applies. Iran has no embassy here, said White House counsel Stephen Miller during a BBC World segment. We cannot wait for a government that funds terror to accept its operatives back. America must act through allies. The global community watched closely. DW noted that Germany and Italy were reviewing similar measures after intelligence failures exposed Russian spies who had used asylum laws to remain in Europe. Israel, too, had recently deported Iranian-linked engineers to Azerbaijan for interrogation, a strategy strikingly similar to Washington's new doctrine. Meanwhile, inside the Pentagon, analysts debated the broader implications. Would deportation through proxy nations strengthen Western intelligence cooperation, or set a dangerous precedent for extrajudicial practices? Jane's Defense Weekly observed that such tactics mirrored Cold War counterespionage, where captured agents were traded, relocated, or erased from the map entirely. Beyond the legal labyrinth, a moral question loomed. Could America, the self-proclaimed beacon of liberty, maintain its global prestige while embracing opaque measures reminiscent of its adversaries? Al Jazeera's editorial board called it a paradox of power, a superpower forced to choose between transparency and survival. For supporters, it was pragmatic realism. For critics, it was the slow erosion of the republic's moral center. Yet the stakes could not be higher, with intelligence reports hinting at more Iranian-linked cells embedded in financial and energy sectors. Trump's advisors argued that hesitation could invite catastrophe. The calculus was grim but clear. Act first, justify later. And so, as deportation flights departed under the cover of darkness, America's legal and ethical boundaries stretched once again. Freedom and fear, justice and necessity, all blurred in the dim light of classified missions. What begins as defense, experts warn, can swiftly become doctrine. When secrecy becomes the guardian of safety, who decides when the war is truly over? By the time Operation Silent Veil entered its final phase, the public mood had shifted from shock to unease. Across social media and cable networks, the question spread like wildfire. What happens when the enemy hides among us? At ICE headquarters, Director Jonathan Fahey briefed reporters on what he called the Invisible Frontline, a phrase that soon dominated international headlines. Unlike the wars of the past, this one had no borders, no uniforms, and no clear victory. The battlefield was everywhere. In airports, classrooms, financial systems, and even neighborhood cafes. Reuters described the operation as a turning point in America's counterintelligence doctrine, marking the moment when Homeland Security became indistinguishable from global warfare. Agents had executed over 200 follow-up raids, seizing encrypted drives, firearms, and false passports tied to both Middle Eastern and Eastern European intermediaries. Inside the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned of a protracted struggle for internal sovereignty, emphasizing that Iran's influence network represented not a single operation, but an evolving threat architecture. According to Jane's Defense Weekly, declassified intelligence suggested that the IRGC had recruited operatives years in advance, some even as exchange students, and maintained contact through proxy companies registered in Canada and Mexico. The scope extended beyond espionage. Analysts from BBC News reported that several of the arrested individuals were connected to financial crimes, including crypto laundering through dark web exchanges. Those operations, small on the surface, collectively funneled millions toward Iran's sanctioned defense industries. Globally, the revelation sparked intense debate. DW compared Operation Silent Veil to Ukraine's digital counteroffensive, where invisible wars are fought not with tanks, but with algorithms. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera argued that the campaign reflected Washington's growing paranoia amid an age of fractured alliances and resurgent authoritarianism. The Guardian, in contrast, noted that European governments had quietly increased cooperation with the US following the operation, fearing similar infiltrations on their soil. In Israel, where tensions with Iran had once again ignited along the Golan Heights, the arrests were hailed as proof that Tehran's network stretched far beyond the Middle East. Mossad officials told Reuters privately that the US has finally recognized that deterrence no longer means distance. Yet even as the administration celebrated success, cracks began to appear in the narrative. Civil rights lawyers questioned the legality of indefinite detentions. Lawmakers demanded transparency, and ordinary citizens, many of them immigrants themselves, feared that the fight against infiltration might one day become a fight against identity. The philosophical divide was unmistakable. Can a free society defend itself without surrendering the very freedoms that define it? Trump, addressing the nation from the Oval Office, insisted that the United States will never apologize for defending its people. His approval ratings surged, but so did international scrutiny. To allies, it was strength. To critics, it was isolation dressed as patriotism. Night fell again over Washington. The hum of surveillance drones replaced the roar of jet engines. On monitors across the Capitol, green blips marked new arrests, new leads, new shadows to chase. The war within had no end date. Somewhere, behind the glow of a computer screen, another signal flickered. Encrypted. Patient. Waiting. And the question that began this story returned, more haunting than ever. If 130 were caught, how many more remain unseen? Operation Silent Veil marked a historic shift in America's defense doctrine, a domestic counterintelligence offensive targeting 130 Iranian nationals accused of acting as covert operatives within U.S. borders. Sparked by President Donald Trump's airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, the mission exposed deep infiltration networks tied to Tehran's Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah. Federal raids from New York to Los Angeles revealed how sleeper agents exploited immigration gaps, forged identities, and funneled funds to foreign proxies. The Supreme Court's new deportation ruling enabled swift removals through allied nations, blending legality with strategy. Analysts worldwide compared the operation to hybrid warfare seen in Ukraine and Israel, where invisible enemies strike from within. Yet beneath triumph lay tension between liberty and security, transparency and control. In 2025, America's greatest battlefield was no longer abroad, it was within, and the haunting question endures: can freedom survive when defense demands secrecy?